We're going to continue on talking about some of these crime-led headlines, but now focusing gears to those who are activists there in that community. I want to put up some of this video here on your screen, but we're going to be talking about the Reform Alliance. You may have heard of them. They are an organization that is committed to reforming the probation and parole system here in our country. You may even recognize a few of the stars that they have there on their board as well, as including Jay-Z, Robert Kraft, Robert Smith, as well as Michael Rubin. I did talk to a bit earlier this week, Jessica Jackson there with the Reform Alliance. She is the CEO, about what all measures they're taking. Let's listen into that interview here on Live Now from Fox. For being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, Jessica, of course, folks may not be familiar with the Reform Alliance. If they've been keeping up in sort of the last few years in the media, you had a very high-profile case where you worked with the artist Meek Mill on some of his probation and parole reform. But just explain some of the work that you all have done over the years.
Well, Reform Alliance is a national nonprofit that exists to transform probation and parole and create pathway to work and wellness for people who are on supervision. We've been around for almost 6 years now and actually got started in the wake of Meek Mill's arrest after he was arrested and sentenced to 2 to 4 years in prison, not for committing a new crime, but actually for violating a small condition of his probation. Because of his incarceration, many people came together and decided that this is not something that is just to be happening in the system, that we can't be locking people up just for technical violations like breaking up a fight in Meek's case and crossing jurisdiction boundaries, leaving the county lines. But that instead we need to be helping support people and make sure that people who are on supervision have the ability to work and actually have the ability to succeed.
And when we're talking about parole in the system in general, you also have to bring in the word recidivism, which folks may not be exactly familiar with, but this is sort of your ability to get back in the hands of law enforcement or maybe commit another crime, quote unquote, and send you back to jail, and you're not really getting the rehabilitation that's necessary. So can you talk about the Reform Alliance and what the work is that you all are doing to prevent those sorts of things from happening?
Yeah, we're passing data-driven laws across the country. Now, we are making sure that these are bills that are not going to lead to a higher recidivism, but actually reduce recidivism. Make sure that people who are coming home from jails and prisons on parole, or people who are put on probation after committing a crime, are given the support they need to succeed, right? That they're able to earn time off of their probation by taking life-changing classes, by working, by addressing mental health and substance abuse needs, by volunteering in their communities, and that through that work, they're actually continuing their rehabilitation instead of ending up committing more crimes. We're also really excited to be working in the job space, to be working and making sure that people who are on probation and parole are able to get employment so that they can provide for their families. If you think about it, it doesn't make any sense the way that the system was working. It was working to destabilize people, which was leading to these really high recidivism rates. But after we took a look at the data, we talked to people on the ground, both law enforcement, as well as conservative legislators and Democratic legislators, and people who had actually been impacted, whose lives were being affected by this. We learned that there were really some common sense things that we could get done. And so we've been doing that. And we're proud today to have passed 19 bills in 11 different states. And those bills, have been passed both by Republicans and Democrats because everybody agrees this is an issue we need to do better on.
And as you're talking about some of these bills, when you're talking about passing them in different states, I think that's also something that maybe folks are not familiar with. The fact that there are laws that are different in different states that can affect how long you may be put on parole, how long you may be put on probation. Can you sort of talk about the disparities between the different states' laws and how they most commonly affect marginalized communities?
Yeah, so in Pennsylvania, where Meek had been incarcerated, and in other states like California, before we passed legislation there, there really wasn't a maximum amount of time that you could be incarcerated for a violation of your probation. We came in, we said that makes no sense, right? Why are we destabilizing people for not even committing new crimes? And we were actually able to change those laws so that now you can't be locked up for more than a certain small period of time if you commit a technical violation. And in many cases, you actually are not incarcerated at all, because incarcerating somebody just because they missed a meeting with their probation officer, or just because they're working and trying to earn a living and feed their family and pay the fines and fees of probation at the same time, doesn't actually make us any safer. In fact, it can do the opposite. So this is an issue that's actually very personal to me. I had a loved one who was incarcerated many years ago, and as hard as his incarceration was on our family, it actually nothing compared to his incarceration that he later got once he had come home, gotten a job, gotten his housing situated, gotten back into his daughter's life. He later was driving from one county to the next, and he actually got pulled over for a busted taillight, something that many people have experienced before. But when he was pulled over, the police officer noticed that he was on probation, and they did a quick check, and they made the mistake thinking that he had not been reporting for his probation. So instead of getting a fix-it ticket like the rest of us would with that busted taillight, he was actually taken into custody and brought to the jail and kept there for weeks. And during that time, he lost his job, he lost his housing situation, and of course, he experienced the trauma of incarceration, which is just a punch in the gut. So these are the kind of things that people are facing all across the country. There's about 3.6 million people who are on some form of supervision, parole, or probation, and they're having to live on the edge of their seats and comply with so many conditions that aren't set up to make them succeed. They're actually set up to trap them and send them back into the system, which doesn't make any of us safer.
And I think that another topic that people often talk about as it pertains to our criminal justice system is also overcrowding in prisons. Can you sort of talk about how reforms work to really rehab and find a new method to better the probation and parole system will cut back on that issue because you aren't sending folks back to prison as often?
Like I said, there's about 3.6 million people who are on some form of supervision. And what most people don't know is that 42% of our jails and prisons is actually filled with people who are there for a supervision violation. And that's not always a new crime. Oftentimes that is a technical violation, like missing a meeting with your probation officer or failing to meet one of the other onerous conditions that are placed on people on supervision. So the more that we inject common sense into the system and start making it where people can actually succeed and where they have incentives to rehabilitate themselves, to have a job, to be out there in their community, to be pursuing their education, the more we're going to see a reduction in the prison population. And that's not because we're letting a bunch of people out. That's because we're stopping people from ending up cycling back in, whether that's committing some sort of new crime or not even committing a crime through a technical violation.
What level does public opinion play in the role of parole and probation reform? Is that a message that's often able to get across to push for more change? Obviously, in the case of Meek Mill, a huge artist who, again, you guys worked with back in 2018, it makes me think that it's when the public sort of galvanizes behind some of these issues that things are able to move forward.
Public support is super important, and I'm going to take the opportunity to say anybody who's listening and watching this right now can sign up and help support us at reformalliance.com. You can become a reformer. You can also follow us on social, of course. But public influence is really important because as we're trying to pass these bills, we need people in their communities to be talking to their legislators and telling them they want to see these reforms passed. We really couldn't do it without the public support. And what's interesting is since Reform Alliance started, we've actually seen a huge difference in public support and in public awareness. In fact, 2 years ago, we started a specific campaign that I'm very proud of, our Gen Z campaign, reaching out to members of Gen Z who are now voters across the country and making a huge difference in our elections, just to raise the awareness around this issue with them. And at first, when we started talking to them and looking at the polling, this issue wasn't even in the top 10 issues for Gen Z. But over the last couple of years, you've seen some really influential Gen Zers like CJ Stroud and others speaking out, the Charlie and Dixie D'Amelio, others stepping up and saying, this is wrong, we need to bring change. And recently, before the last election, we actually did some more polling on Gen Z and this issue and saw a stunning shift in terms of support. In fact, 1 out of 3 of the people who we polled said that if the other candidate were to say that they supported this issue, they would switch their vote to them, which is just astounding. So it's a really important issue. It's one that we're excited to see Gen Z having so much momentum around. In fact, this week is our Gen Z week. We've got our rock star Gen Z organizer out on college campuses all across the country. We have tons of activations going on and just young folks speaking out saying they want to see the system changed.
The Gen Z work, I'm sure, is going to be super impactful for the organization and that generation as a whole. Lastly, before I let you go, Jessica, any other reforms or goals that the Reform Alliance has moving forward that truly you all are focusing on and would like public support?
Absolutely. So this is an issue that affects people on the local level, the state level, the federal level, and Reform Alliance is proud to be working on all 3 levels. In addition to our state work, which you can find on our website, we also have a federal bill, the Safer Supervision Act, that's going to be reintroduced into this Congress. We're excited for folks to join Reform and to help us get that bill passed because it's going to be life-changing for Americans all across the country.
And we appreciate you for also being with us here on Live Now from Fox to break down some of the importance of parole and probation reform. Again, Jessica Jackson there, the CEO of the Reform Alliance. Thanks so much for your time.